Beyond Blind Faith, Evidence for the Existence of God, Part 3. The psychological argument, the moral argument. Is DNA proof of God's existence? Can it be called microbiota, bacteria, archaea, uncellular algae, protozoa, fungi and viruses, the second human genome? Can the human brain and the eye prove the reality of a creator? Can the human soul and spirit be grounds for the existence of God? Can consciousness be considered a law of human nature? Psychological and moral arguments are part of the category of rational arguments. The human being is incredibly complex and amazing in every way. Just looking at our internal universe, it is impossible not to be amazed by the richness and precision of the actions within us, at the complex processes that go about their business without asking us how to perform their function or how they cooperate and support each other. We just mention in passing that we have 1 trillion cells per kilogram stroke body. They are true servants that support our existence. In each cell of the several tens of trillions of cells, about the size of a human body, there are more than 30,000 reactions. Each of these reactions works with incredible precision and is perfectly controlled. In the human microism, electrons travel faster than the speed of light and travel thousands of kilometers per second. You would be amazed at how complex the reality of the human microism is. In fact, this complexity, this precision and harmony at the level of the human biosystem forces us to recognize the truth that we know that we live and enjoy life, but we don't really know in fact what life means in the depth of its functionality. Chemistry, physics, biology, biochemistry, etc. must recognize their limits in front of the notion of life. There are dozens of components and millions of processes in the body that we are not even aware of, but they work and we exist because our organs know and do their job flawlessly. But in addition to the components of the human being, man also has reason, thinking, analytical capabilities, synthesis, memory, feelings, passion, experiences, etc. And in this respect, up to the present time, we are still very far from being able to explain their existence and deep functionality. In the following, we briefly present a few things with the thought of once again asking ourselves the question, what is more credible, evolutionism or creationism? Human DNA. We know that the cell is the most complex and mysterious system that still makes man think. The reason is that organic molecules are so complex that their formation cannot be explained as coincidence, and it's obviously impossible for an organic cell to have formed by chance. DNA, or in other words deoxyribonucleic acid, is found in every cell of living beings, from the smallest single-celled being to humans, and coordinates their daily actions. It is formed in turn from very complex organic molecules. It is basically an instruction manual, a program of 3 billion letters that conditions, influences, and programs the activity and behavior of the cell in a way specific to each person. Dr. Francis Collins, director of the Human Genome Project, which mapped the structures of the human DNA, said that we can think of DNA as a script with instructions, a software program that sits in the nucleus of every cell. Many of us probably know that every cell in our body contains a very detailed code, like a miniature computer program. The DNA in our cells is very similar to a highly sophisticated computer program. Remember that a computer program is made up of a series of ones and O's, series called binary code, and can look like this. And this series continues. The succession and distribution of these ones and O's are what make the program work properly. In the same way, DNA is made up of 4 chemical substances: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, which researchers abbreviate as A, T, G, and C. Very similar to the series of ones and O's, these letters are arranged in the structure of the human cell, for example, and the string goes on like this. The succession is the order in which these letters are arranged to give the necessary and sufficient indications of how the cell is to function. It's amazing that in the tiny space of every cell in your body, this code is 3 billion letters long. To get an idea of the immensity of information contained in the DNA code of a single cell, imagine that someone was to read this code in real time at a speed of 3 letters per second. In that case, it would take him over 30 years to read it in its entirety without stopping either day or night. There is one more thing that needs to be specified. It has been proven that 99.9% of a human DNA is similar to the genetic material of all other humans. But what makes a person unique comes from the 0.1% difference in how the 3 billion letters are arranged in your cells. But DNA has another peculiarity. It is essential to the identity of any organism. From this perspective, this code defines the very uniqueness of each human being. By guarding this arrangement, the 3 billion letters in the cells of the human body, a government can identify its own citizens. However, you may be wondering from an evolutionary perspective, what is so special about this DNA? Its importance derives from the answers to the questions it raises. How did this program end up with such multiple, strict and detailed information in every cell, respectively cells of the human body? What is the connection between some simple chemicals and the genetic information that determines the behavior and activity of a cell? Because since we are talking about programmed information, then biological or natural causes are out of the question. This is also due to the fact that the information is not of a material nature. Furthermore, it is impossible to have such precise information with clearly defined purposes without having been included in a cell intentionally and with a purpose. Remember, a DNA molecule contains areas called genes, areas without function as well as areas with yet unknown roles. Perry Marshall, computer scientist and author of books including on evolution, says, "There has never been a computer program that was not designed, whether it is a code, a program or a message, given through a human language. There was always an intelligent mind behind it." The British philosopher Dr. Anthony Flew, an American geneticist, director of the National Human Genome Research Institute of the United States of federal government and a brand spokesperson of atheism, was very actively involved in the debates in the scientific area. He says that it was precisely the latest scientific discoveries that led him to accept a conclusion that he had no way of avoiding: that the existence of a superintelligence is the only viable explanation for the origin of life and the complexity of nature. The determining factor of this conclusion was precisely the discovery of human DNA and its complexity. Like ex-atheist Dr. Anthony Flew, sincere in his quest, it is common sense to ask questions about this very complex, intelligent and coherent 3 billion letter genetic code that commands a human cell. It is evident, indisputable, that the cell contains a multitude of information which has definite purposes determined and which acts on the basis of initial commands. From this perspective, we are faced with the questions that require relevant answers. Who is the author of this information? Who placed this highly functional informational code inside the cell? How could one plausibly explain this code so sophisticated and abounding in informational commands by the contribution of chance? Is it not more plausible to accept the idea that behind this informational code, a recipe necessary for protein synthesis, there is an information transmitter, a programmer, and intentional informational planning? Isn't this mystery of the mysterious conception and working of this informational code clear proof in favour of the existence of God? From the creationist perspective, only a brilliant mind could accomplish such a project. The entire structure of DNA speaks of the existence of a grand, coherent and purposeful design of incredible intelligence. Dr. Francis Collins says, "It is a humbling and awe-inspiring experience for me to realise that we have been able to catch a glimpse of our own instruction manual, previously known only to God." Human microbiota. Microbiota, the second human genome. Microbiota, also called the microbiome, represents the set of commensal, symbiotic or parthenogenic microorganisms that populate an ecosystem or habitat, e.g. soil, water, milk, plants, animals, humans. Microorganisms that constitute a microbiota are represented by bacteria, archaea, unicellular algae, protozoa, fungi and viruses. The term microbiome, which is synonymous with microbiota, also has another meaning: the collective genome of the microorganisms that populate an ecosystem. The word commensal is defined as a specific form of relationship between two plants or two animals, in which one uses the food remains of the other. When we talk about bacteria, people think of them as pathogens. This is also because only one side of them is emphasized more, namely the parthenogenic aspect. The word pathogen really refers to disease, something that causes disease or infection, that is, disease carrying. But there is another very important, less publicized aspect of the human microbiota. Although available figures are often inconsistent, new information states that microbiota in the human body numbers 40 trillion bacteria. 400/4,000 different types, accounting for 1 kilogram of our body weight and located mainly in the gut. It contains millions of genes compared to the human genome, which is only 20,000 to 25,000 genes and is considered the second human genome. It is frequently seen as very similar to its own organ. The interaction between humans and bacteria is amazing. We would not exist without them. Our body could not function without the microbiota, which has a well-defined role in maintaining health. Someone perhaps may ask what the connection is between God and some microorganisms that feed on leftovers from something else, and that has a role in fermentation. People are amazed by the complexity of the human organism, even the person who has a quick gander over these things. This justifies the question once again: how can chance, randomness, or incident produce, manage, and control this mechanism so sophisticated like the human body is, an organism that is so complex and functions with astonishing precision? How can chaos produce such organicity in every cell, even a microbial one, establishing well-written job roles? Would it not be more plausible there is an omniscient mind which scripted this, that we would say is a secondary auxiliary need of our organism? A super intelligence capable of maintaining balance is vital for humankind. Just a small amount of this microbial cell is beneficial, but it can be harmful in large quantities. Modern medicine recognizes this truth and says that the proteolytic microbiota is beneficial in small amounts, but harmful in large quantities. Also, yeast has a beneficial role in minor amounts, but it's harmful when there are in higher quantities and form micelles. But who can determine the balanced quantitative existence of these pathogenic cells? Who told these cells how to quantitatively regulate themselves in such a way as to ensure precise functioning within the limits of human goodness and the avoidance of evil? Isn't fly tuning amazing? Can chance accomplish this? This intelligent activity takes place in conditions where the human body is a complex ecosystem that hosts trillions of bacteria and other microorganisms and cells. Each cell is specialized and knows exactly what it's programmed to do. Let's remember a few things about the intestinal microbiome and that of the colon. The intestinal microbiome includes over 1,000 different species of bacteria with over 3 million genes, 150 times more than the human genes, and weighing approximately 1/3% of the body's weight. The intestinal microbiota has therefore an essential role in the fermentation process of indigestible substrates such as dietary fibers, and this fermentation will support the growth of microorganisms which produce short-chain fatty acids, SCFA, and gases. Another interesting thing, 1/3 of the intestinal microbiome is common to most people, while 2/3 are specific to each of us. This aspect makes the microbiome to be discussed as a kind of identity card or digital fingerprint that individualizes each person. Therefore, the interaction between the microbiome and the intestinal immune system is essential to maintain the homeostasis of the intestinal mucosa. The rapid colonization of the gastrointestinal tract in newborns plays an essential role in the development of the intestinal immune system. The transient microbiota intermittently colonizes the intestine and consists of both potentially pathogenic and non-pathogenic microorganisms. We only mention a few more things about this topic not explored enough by science. Until recently, the microbiota of the colon plays an essential role in the health of the body through its participation in the performance of important functions. It regulates the functioning of the intestinal immune system, preventing the invasion of microorganisms and pathogenic bacteria, synthesizing some vitamins, maintaining the integrity of the intestinal mucosa, stimulating the movements of the intestinal muscles to ensure transit and reducing unpleasant sensations of discomfort and bloating, avoiding intestinal inflammatory processes. The native resident microbiota is acquired in the first year of life and is a unique combination for each individual, like a fingerprint. In the face of this reality, questions arise. How can chance and chaos be so inventive and wise as to support life? Only a superpower can have such a visionary design. Moreover, this super creator respects the individual identity of each living thing. Stop and think just how amazing this is. The human brain. Is the brain proof of the existence of God? The brain works differently than other organs. We mention only a few facts related to the extraordinarily complex activity of the human brain. Our brain, through its dense network of neurons, simultaneously processes an impressive volume of information. Over 1 million messages per second, messages that come primarily but not only through the 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste and a sense of touch. It is characterized by intelligence, the ability to reason, analyze, synthesize, plan, stimulate feelings, dreams, etc. It processes all our emotions, thoughts and memories. The cells that make up the human brain store 5 times more information than the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. Encyclopedia contains articles with over 2.6 million words and over 2,000 images. Of the daily amount of information received by the brain, 126 bits per second are received consciously, and the rest of the information remains in the subconscious area. Mathematician John von Neumann calculated that the human mind can store 280 quadrillion bits of memory. He analyzes the importance of all this information, sorting out the relatively insignificant ones. This filtering function allows us to focus and act efficiently. In the face of such a complex reality and with such an amazing activity, how many credible evolutionary arguments can stand in support of the theory of chance or of the human being within animal limits? The human eye. Can the eye be proof of God's existence? The eye is one of the most important sensory organs. It is probably the most complex of all. The human eye has over 2 million component parts, being the second most complex organ of the human body after the brain. Let's remember that the eye can distinguish between 7 million different colours. It automatically focuses the image and can track no less than 1.5 million messages simultaneously. It consists of a system of sensitive to light changes, capable of transforming them into nerve impulses. The eyes are a channel of communication between the environment and the brain, being part of the visual system that is integrated into the sensory system. These are some of the most important organs of the body, constantly working to accumulate visual information by receiving new images on the surface of the retina, and the retina of the eye can be said to exceed the performance of a next-generation ultra-performance computer. Even Charles Darwin states in his book on the origin of species that the evolution of the eye by natural selection seems absurd to the highest degree. The eye is so advanced that the back of the globe is about 3 centimeters in size and contains over 137 million photosensitive cells with rods and bends. This is impossible with man, but not with God. Psalm 94:9, He that hath foreplanted the ear, shall he not hear? He who formed the eye, could he not see? Evolution focuses on mutations and changes in existing organisms. However, evolution alone cannot fully explain the emergence of the eye or the brain, that is, the emergence of living organisms from lifeless matter. We know that evolutionary theory tries to explain the origin of life without the intervention of God, but it hits its own limit when it realized that some life systems are so complex that they could not have evolved. Some things would have been impossible to evolve. The term they are stuck in and trying to avoid is called irreducible complexity. What does this mean? In a few words, irreducible complexity refers to the fact that a singular system, such as, for example, the eye, is composed of several perfectly integrated and interdependent component elements that contribute to the realization of a basic function, in our case, sight. Removal of one of these component parts renders the entire system ineffective. It is enough to hurtfully touch a component of the eye, and we will better understand the truth of this reality. The human growth. Are the growth of the human body and living things proof of the existence of God? Let's just think about some of the aspects of the growth of our organs, from the time we are conceived in the womb to adulthood, of how we can grow and then just stop. Who starts the clock and stops it? Why do our nails continue to grow so that we have to cut them down in length? If the internal organs grew faster than the body, they would no longer take place in the body. If the heart were to grow more slowly compared to the body, it would no longer be able to feed the whole system, causing serious dysfunctions of the whole form. If the eyes grew faster than the eye sockets, what would they look like? And we can continue, because harmonious growth is also subject related to pre-existential integrative plan in our functional code. The ability to heal. It is clear that mankind had to have the ability to heal from the beginning, otherwise life would have had serious existential problems. There probably wouldn't even be life if the body didn't know how to repair itself in the first place. An open wound, if the blood did not coagulate, would have been enough to create serious problems. We often injure our skin and it can repair itself. We can still think about what it would be like if a broken bone didn't weld, etc. It raises a question that evolutionists have difficulty answering: acceptability, namely, do we control how this is done and when this restoration process ends? Do we control how much gastric juice our stomachs produces, or how fast our heart beats? And the list goes on, and so do our questions about who put these self-healing systems inside us. Could it be coincidence, or do we see a super intelligent mind that has thought of everything? The multiplication and reproduction of life. Evolutionists have great problems giving a convincing answer when we talk about the complexity of the act of procreation. They also have trouble explaining how this super intelligent happening creates two different but complementary beings who are also capable of procreating a unique living being, yet different from themselves. According to Darwin's theory, the first ape had to make babies, In other words, cellular organisms arise not from simple to complex, but directly with the ability to reproduce. There seems to be a big little impasse between creationist logic and explanation. A conclusion is imposed on this topic without the right of discussion, that if there was no reproductive function, there would be no life and no man in the terms we know them. The soul of man. Man is conceived as a trinity, body, soul and spirit. The soul is the one that includes A, the component of the intellect that includes thinking, the capacity for analysis, synthesis, memorization, etc. B, the affect component, with everything specific to feelings, pleasure, etc. C, and the will. Materialists cannot explain the existence of the soul, the human spirit, or of consciousness. We dwell a little on the topic of consciousness. The moral argument. Consciousness, the law of human nature. In common terms, a conscience is often described as leading to feelings of remorse when a person does something that conflicts with their moral or socially existing values. It rebukes him when he does evil and rejoices when he does good. The conscience can eat away at the soul like wood decay eats the wood. Sometimes it reproves man so strongly that he may despair and lose hope. Charles Darwin believed that any animal endowed with well-marked social instincts would inevitably acquire a moral sense or conscience as its intellectual powers approached those of man. But this inner voice, this inner light, cannot be reflection of matter or something material. It is an unseen power of the human soul. Where do you think we get the spirit of morality? Can anyone think that the Big Bang and chance were the sparks of morality? It would be difficult to accept this through evolution. Not even culture can replace this inner voice that has been inherent to the human being ever since we speak of native common sense, or since we could orient our thoughts towards a self-introspection, our own objective self-analysis. Christians or atheists without distinction all share some moral sense. Every human being on this earth and in any society or culture can distinguish between good and evil and can choose to do one or the other. Evolutionists did not answer for the existence of consciousness any more than they did for the soul. This is because if we had not evolved, we would not have had the orientation towards God's moral absolutes. If these things did not evolve, let us ask where they came from. How do we know something is bad or good, and how do we distinguish between the two? If we did not have moral absolutes, how would we know that it is wrong to steal, to lead an immoral life, not to kill one another, to steal, etc.? And without these moral absolutes, we would no longer have remorse when we do something bad, when we harm each other and do injustices of any kind to each other. How would mankind survive if, when we didn't like something about our neighbour, we simply killed them, and then we went and ate and lay down and were content without any fear or thought? Every people in history had a perception of good or bad, and had one form or another of norms or laws. Injustice, crimes, lies, theft and immorality have never been associated with good. Where could we get this sense of right and wrong? Creationist of consciousness, as the voice of God in man, the moral law written by him in the heart of man. In the fibre of consciences are the laws of God, especially the Ten Commandments laws regarding good and bad, right and wrong, moral and immoral, beautiful and ugly, etc. We find it written in Psalm 48, I want to do your will, God, and your law is in the bottom of my heart. The thought of immortality. The conservation instinct. That instinct of defence in humans and animals in order to maintain one's own being was generally taught at school. Immortality is probably less talked about in the class environment, even if we find this term more in the religious field. However, immortality is a subject that has preoccupied man throughout time. Popular literature, and not only youth without old age and life without death, along with the fight between good and evil, was one of the subjects that complemented man's concern for things beyond him. We recall a few things regarding this aspect. Man's tendency to defy death can be found in many aspects of life. In our modern world, this is best highlighted in the field of cryogenics, a method by which man tries to preserve his body over time in the hope that in the future science will have a say and be able to give the deceased a new chance at life. Cryogenetics is a method of embalming by freezing. We only mention the idea of digital immortality, which might be worth talking about in a future article, or maybe it would be better to let science have time to speak, especially since it is preparing a human project, tempting for some, for others completely out of the ethics of human condition, transhumanism. Along the lines of this thought, we also remember man's efforts to remain in the memory and soul of others, or in the collective memory over generations. With few exceptions, even being old, man would like one more day of life, even if life had not been too generous with him. This can also be found among people who can afford to maintain their health to the standards required by a well-functioning body to try their hand at old age. The concern of women, not only to look as young as possible in old age, has encouraged the cosmetic industry to thrive by using this impulse considered natural and found only in humans. All these aspects and others confirm a truth found on the pages of the Bible. Ecclesiastes 3:11. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end.